Hey, it's Huck. And now that the last balloons have fallen in Tampa, the hard reality ought to be settling in right about now that there is an increasing likelihood voters are going to make the same mistake this November that they made back in 2010. One thing I'll say for the Romney Ryan team is they seem to be getting a good head start on creating jobs in America. As anyone who has followed the campaign up till now, or watched any of their ads on television, or listened to any of their convention speeches, surely has to marvel at the number of fact-checkers required to keep up with all of the lies and deceptions they keep putting out there. Vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan's speech was so riddled with misinformation and untruths that it actually became a trending topic on Twitter for 24 hours with the hashtag Lyin Ryan, blaming Obama for not moving forward on the Simpson Bowles Debt Commission recommendations, for instance. The thing about the Simpson Bowles plan was that there were plenty of things in there that were upsetting to both Democrats and Republicans. For Democrats, the things that were probably most upsetting included the fact that today's ridiculously low tax rates paid by the very rich in this country were going to be reduced 10% more, while the adjustments to both Social Security and Medicare were particularly harsh. And it called for significant reductions in the amount of corporate taxes paid in this country, meaning, all in all, the recommendations were geared much more towards cuts than in raising revenue. Virtually every government agency would face drastic cuts, some to the point of being virtually unable to do their job. For Republicans, one key deal breaker was that the plan called for keeping Obamacare in place. And not only that, actually recommended that the public option, something Obama and Democrats pursued while working on the health care reform bill, would actually be implemented, helping to further lower the costs of medical care in this country. In addition, the commission recommended significant cuts in defense spending while implementing a policy that would begin taxing capital gains and dividend income as ordinary income. So the 15% current capital gains tax on investment income would, for millionaires and billionaires, be raised up to the highest tax bracket under their plan, either 24 or 26%, depending on which variant of their plan you went with. This was all, of course, too much for Congressman Paul Ryan, who, along with two other Republican House members, sat on the Bowles-Simpson Commission. Ryan led the group to unanimously reject the plan when it came to a vote. Now, Obama had said he would recommend the commission's plan if, in fact, the commission itself could muster 14 votes out of its 18 members. But with Ryan convincing his two colleagues on the commission to vote against it, it fell 3 votes short, with only 11 members, rather than 14, approving the measure. And so, Obama didn't move forward with the commission's recommendations. As former Republican senator and co-chair of the commission, Alan Simpson, put it, he was convinced that Ryan and other Republicans on that commission were committed to sticking it to the president rather than find any solution at all to the debt crisis. And as PolitiFact noted this week, quoting one other commission member, Ryan blaming Obama for the commission's failure is sort of like murdering your parents and then begging mercy from the court for being an orphan. But the Simpson Bowles lie in Ryan's speech was just one of a whole litany of mistruths and deceptions Ryan riddled his speech with. Fox News contributor Sally Cohn, who I can only assume is out looking for a new job this week, labeled Ryan's speech an attempt by Ryan to set a world record for the greatest number of blatant lies and misrepresentations slipped into a single speech. Among these lies, Ryan blamed Obama for a downgrading of America's credit rating, when in fact it was Republicans in Congress who refused to raise the debt ceiling unless the Bush tax cuts were made permanent. With his best doe-eyed look of sincerity, Ryan blamed Obama for the closing of a GM plant back in Ryan's hometown of Janesville, Wisconsin, when in fact that GM plant actually closed nearly 2 months before Obama was sworn into office in January of 2009. Interestingly, Ryan had asked the Bush administration prior to the plant's closing in December of 2008 for federal funds to keep the plant open. Of course, fellow Republicans in Congress and Bush rejected his idea. Then when Obama later provided federal funding to save GM and Chrysler, suddenly Ryan was among the unanimous hue and cry of Republicans, calling this bailout of the auto industry and the more than 1 million jobs it represents in America as some sort of socialist, communist, Marxist government takeover of industry. But the biggest lie of all, in fact, the biggest lie in the entire Romney-Ryan campaign, is the Medicare lie. Now here I'm afraid I'm going to have to bog you down in just a little detail. But I firmly believe the Medicare issue is the issue of this campaign. So let me be absolutely clear on this point. The Republicans who went along with the whole Medicare idea back in 1965 when it was signed into law by President Johnson did so only after an enormous amount of screaming and kicking all the way. Every Republican unanimously opposed the idea of Medicare in every committee hearing, in every House vote, leading up to the final votes on the bill. When the House finally passed a version of the Medicare bill overwhelmingly without a Republican vote, it got into the hands of the Senate, again overwhelmingly Democrat. And at this point, there were some moderate Republicans in the Senate who saw the writing on the wall, that if they voted no against the bill, it wouldn't do anything to stop it. Moreover, they would be on the wrong side of history on what would prove to be a very popular program. At that point, a few of the Republican senators voted for it. Most, like Senator Bob Dole, future President George H.W. Bush, future President Gerald R. Ford, Strom Thurmond, Donald Rumsfeld, all voted against it. Since the passage of Medicare, the reality of living out your twilight years in America has improved dramatically. Before Medicare, half of all seniors had no health insurance whatsoever. 1 in 4 seniors refused to get medical treatment even when seriously ill because they knew they couldn't afford the costs. And 1/3 of all senior citizens lived in dire poverty, most due to medical illnesses that cost them their home, their savings, and practically every possession they owned. Despite the huge success of Medicare, where today fewer than 14% of senior citizens live in poverty, Republicans have continually tried to defund it, dismantle it, and eliminate the program. These attempts to destroy Medicare by Republicans didn't start with the Ryan budget plan. From day one, since its inception in 1965, Republicans in Congress have launched literally more than 1,000 bills or amendments targeting Medicare for destruction. One such attempt included Newt Gingrich's plan back in 1995 when, as Speaker of the House, he proposed in a budget bill reducing revenues to the Medicare program by 14%, later revealing that the grand design of his plan was to allow Medicare to, as he put it, wither from the vine by so underfunding the growing costs of the program as to make it completely unsustainable for future generations. In the 2008 campaign, Senator John McCain planned to cut $1.3 trillion from Medicare and Medicaid. And these cuts wouldn't go to try to reduce the prices of medical services, as Obama's cuts in Medicare do. Rather, it was merely aimed at reducing the amount of money available for people to get those services, just so that every moron Republican who believes the people they elect mean them no harm. Let me explain this in a way I'm sure you can understand. Obama's widely publicized $716 billion worth of cuts to the Medicare program basically come in two categories. One category is identifying waste, fraud, and abuse. And let me explain how this works. There are literally thousands and thousands of doctors out there who routinely prescribe antibiotics for viruses. Viruses aren't affected by antibiotics, but it keeps the drug companies happy, and it keeps sometimes patients happy because they think, well, I'm taking something, I guess I'll get better. Meanwhile, the drug companies are making a huge profit. And Medicare is paying huge amounts of money for this every year for a medication prescription that is completely ineffective. Let me give you one more example. How many doctors in hospitals will schedule you for this test and that test, this x-ray or that CAT scan, when they're already sure of the diagnosis and all they're really trying to do is subsidize their payments for all the expensive diagnostic equipment that's in their office or hospital? The other area where these $716 billion in cuts will be applied to the Medicare program, and this is probably the most important one of all, is that it reduces the amount of payment to the healthcare provider for the service that's provided. This not only helps reduce the cost of medical services overall, but it also extends the life of the Medicare funding needed to pay for services. Truth is, this is exactly what insurance is supposed to do, but doesn't do well at all. The idea behind insurance is that the larger the group insured, the better that group can negotiate for lower prices for the medical services provided to it. Where competition in most industries generally helps to drive prices down, it has the exact opposite effect in the insurance industry. The more insurance companies there are, the smaller each group is, and the less negotiating power they have to help reduce those costs. It's gotten so bad, insurance companies don't even make much of an attempt to negotiate lower prices anymore. They merely pass on the rising costs to those who are insured. And if things get too out of hand, they drop the highest risk customers from their policies altogether. And of course, insurance companies are in it for the profit, so regardless of how high prices go, they've got to make sure that they keep the prices high enough so they can get their 10 or 20% profit off the top. This is where Medicare, and where a public option, if it was ever implemented, would have dramatic effect on the rising costs of healthcare. First, of course, there's no profit. Every dollar of revenue raised goes directly into patient services. But even more impressive, especially now, as baby boomers are beginning to swell the number of Medicare participants, this larger group of participation gives Medicare much greater leverage to negotiate lower prices on medicine and medical care in general. The reason universal care and government-run healthcare systems are so popular and so cheap in places like Canada and throughout Europe is because the government can control how much they pay for a given service. And doctors and hospitals can't refuse this lower amount. Otherwise, they'd have no patients at all. And Medicare kind of works the same way. Providers would be pretty stupid to refuse millions and millions of potential customers simply because they have to take a smaller price for the service they provide, because somebody else will provide that service and get all that money. In America, the typical doctor's visit, when you figure in whatever tests or procedures that might be entailed in some visits, averages out to about $100 per patient per visit. In Japan, the average is about $14. In Japan, doctors often work 14 hours a day. The most ambitious of them, maybe 6 days a week. You know, kind of like the rest of us. In America, a lot of doctors work 9 to 5, maybe 3 days a week, leaving them 4 days a week to go out and enjoy their golf game, or bet on the horses, or Saturday's college football game. This might help explain to you why so many, not all, but so many doctors, nurses, hospitals, and medical providers hate Medicare, hate Medicaid, and hate any idea of some type of universal health care system that can dictate lower prices for the services they provide. Compare these Obama efforts to the plans proposed by Newt Gingrich in '95, Senator McCain in 2008, and Ryan's budget proposal of 2010 and 2011. Where Obama targets fraud, waste, and abuse, the Republicans ignore it. Where Obama leverages lower costs for the services provided, the Republicans make no effort to hold down costs whatsoever, instead transferring Medicare to private insurance companies who will take some of that money as a profit and merely continue to rise prices, the result being that they will just eliminate certain services they'll no longer pay for. Sorry, that's not covered. Sorry, you've hit your benefit gap. Sorry, you're on your own. Fact is, Republicans have never, ever embraced Medicare. The few Republicans back in 1965 who ultimately did vote for its passage did so only when the writing was on the wall it was going to pass anyway. They didn't want to see their names in the history books voting against a program that would prove to be as successful and overwhelmingly popular as it has become. And those were moderate Republicans, something that is an extinct species within the Republican Party these days. Today's ultra-conservative Republicans are out to do the job once and for all that Republicans have been trying to do since 1965, end Medicare once and for all. And they're trying to use the debt created by years of Republican tax cuts, Republican wars, and Republican policies that have led to an exodus of American jobs to places like China as their excuse. Anyone foolish enough to believe Romney and Ryan actually intend to preserve and protect Medicare are in need of immediate mental health services. For a true view of how Republicans view Medicare, just take a look at what Republicans in red states are doing to Medicaid. Hundreds of millions of dollars in red states have been slashed from Medicaid, while those same states are providing hundreds of millions of dollars each in additional corporate tax breaks. Medicaid was designed as a last-ditch support system for medical services to the very poorest among us. Most folks who receive Medicaid coverage don't live at the poverty line, but they have incomes well below that threshold. Many of them have income levels so low they couldn't afford an $80 a month trailer lot fee, let alone the price of the trailer to put on the lot or the utility bills required to actually live in the trailer. In Texas, If you earn an income of even $3,000 a year, you're ineligible for Medicaid. Sorry, you're on your own. Now maybe you morons out there who've been railing against Obamacare and the Medicare adjustments Obama put in place will finally get it. But I don't have real high hopes. Which brings me to Romney's speech at the convention Thursday night. How shallow of a man do you have to be to implement, as governor of your state, the model upon which Obamacare is based? Urge the new president to implement a similar program nationally, and then campaign for 2 years against that program as some sort of abomination, vowing to repeal it as the very first thing you plan to do if elected. And how shallow of a man do you have to be to funnel tens of millions of dollars of your personal fortune into shadowy foreign tax-free accounts while proposing an additional 10% tax reduction on the very wealthy in this country, resulting in at least a $2,200 tax increase on most middle-income and low-income families? When Romney first began running at the start of his campaign, part of me wondered whether or not he was just playing this conservative game, secretly harboring his more moderate views in order to get the conservative support he would require in order to attain his goal of reaching the presidency. But the reality is, Romney could never function in the White House as a political moderate, given the hand he's been dealt by Republicans in Congress and the Senate, who are as extreme both on foreign policy as they are on domestic and social policy as any views we've ever seen in the modern Western world. These extremists who laugh at the idea of global climate change, even as glaciers melt and oceans rise, who look at historic levels of poverty and an historically high national debt, yet propose trillions of dollars in additional tax breaks for millionaires, while cutting off aid to those poor and destitute. Extremists who blame unions for our failing schools, despite the fact that these unions also represent some of this nation's best schools and highest achieving students. If Romney is elected through the help of a few profit-hoarding billionaires helping to fund his deceptive ads, if Romney is elected with the help of elected state officials who have attempted to disenfranchise as many as 5 million likely Democratic registered voters in this country, if Romney is elected with the help of Truth the Vote, an organization claiming to be as many as 1 million strong, to intimidate and hover over every minority voter in every precinct in the country, if Romney is elected, and recent indications are this is becoming a very likely outcome, there's no way that he will or even could stand up to these Republican cohorts of his. To stand in their way would be to assure that he cuts off the financial support and machinations that put him in power in the first place. But ultimately, nothing in Romney's personal life, as well as we can flesh it out, suggests that Romney is anything other than the ultra-conservative he now claims to be. From his bullying of the gay kid at prep school, to the deferments he sought to get out of the Vietnam War, from his creation of a predatory investment firm, Bain Capital, which took pride in shipping tens of thousands of jobs to China, buying out profitable businesses and putting them out of business, leveraging them with high-interest loans, selling their assets, and profiting from their hardships, to his own stated belief that shielding his income in foreign tax havens, taking every possible deduction and exemption to pay less in taxes than he might otherwise, is somehow a prerequisite skill and makes him a true patriotic American. This is the real Mitt Romney. The facts don't lie, and these are the facts. No matter how much money he spends on advertising to paint himself differently, and regardless of how many lies he and his running mate, Paul Ryan, cram into their speeches. I'm Huck, and that's my opinion, and I'd really like to hear yours. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you real soon.